Today I want to talk about our ancestors and the moon, the phases of the moon, ritual working with the different phases of the moon, and the various names of the moon throughout the yearly cycle. The earliest uses of the moon to measure time go back to around 28,000 to 30,000 years ago. Why did they use the moon? Well, it was the most obvious astronomical event that was visible to man, and careful observation of the moon allowed them to calculate the seasons. And soon they were using rituals to revere this mysterious godlike cycle. Now the lunar cycle has 29 days, 12 hours and 44 minutes, and 3 seconds, making a lunar year about 11 days shorter than a solar year. 13 full lunar cycles takes approximately 374 days. That's too many for farming and agriculture. Our ancestors needed to be able to accurately calculate the seasons, and the lunar calendar had a problem. It would get out of sync after a couple of years. So they soon came up with this idea of a lunar solar calendar, or that's what we call it today. So lunar solar calendars, their months are based on observations of the lunar solar cycle, but with an intercalculatory month to sync the calendar. So this first slide shows the Coligny Calendar, and this tablet dates back to the 2nd century. And the Coligny Calendar is the oldest known Celtic lunar calendar, and it adds a 13th intercalculatory month every 2.5 years. And it's thought that it may even date back to pro-Celtic times, and they think maybe as far back as 800 BC. So now this second slide shows the Coligny Calendar with the extra months. And if we look at this calendar, we can see it's a 5-year cycle, and the first year has an extra month right at the start. The second year is a normal 12-month year. The third year has another intercalculatory month added right in the middle of the year. And this then allows them to calculate accurately the seasons over a 5-year cycle. Today, we don't need to calculate yearly cycles by the moon. We have the sun to allow us to be able to do that far more accurately. Following the moon's phases throughout the month is very useful for ritual work. The moon has a very powerful presence and can work to great effect, helping to induce the levels of awareness and consciousness appropriate for ceremonial and ritual workings. So now let's look at the 3 phases of the moon. And these, of course, are the waning phase, the full moon phase, and the waxing phase. Now these 3 phases of the moon represented to our ancestors the cycle of life, death and rebirth. And this also introduces the concept of the Trifold Goddess, the maiden, the mother and the crone. Also represents the constant, infinite iteration of creation, life, death and rebirth, or in the vegetation cycle, creation, life and decay. So we also have the concept of a Trifold God, which isn't so widely known. And the Trifold God is represented with the waxing moon being the horned stag of the woodlands and the son of the goddess. And in the vegetation stage, it's rebirth. The full moon represented the horned one at his peak, the warrior and the father, and also the lord of flocks. And in the vegetation stage, he was life in its fullness. The waning moon corresponded to the sage and the hunter, and in the vegetation cycle, decay and death. Now let's look at the moon in ceremony and ritual. The waxing phases were used for progressive and positive purposes, such as an increase or gain in something, maybe an increase in wealth or maybe a pay increase. The waning phases were used for destructive or negative or aggressive purposes, such as a decrease or a loss. And that could just be something as simple as ridding yourself of a bad habit. Now the full moons, they were times for enchantment and communion with the Mother Goddess. Now I found two traditional Wiccan ceremonies. The first one is called drawing down the moon, and this is an invocation of the goddess, and the goddess would be invoked from the moon down into a member of the coven, or if you're a solo practitioner, you could invoke the moon down into yourself. The next ceremony is cakes and ale, and that's very much like communion within the Christian church, where bread and wine were symbolic or are symbolic of the body and blood of the great Mother Goddess. Now, let's talk about some moon names, or names that were given to the various moons throughout the early cycle. Now, this first set I have from the Royal Museums at Greenwich, and they seem to correspond very closely to the same moon names that were used by the Native American tribes. January gives us the wolf moon, and this is named after the howling of the hungry wolves who were lamenting due to the scarcity of food in midwinter. And February gives us the snow moon for obvious reasons. It gets pretty cold and snowy in February. Well, it does in the northern hemisphere anyway. March gives us the worm moon, and this is the last full moon of winter, named after the worm trails that would appear in the newly thawed ground. April gives us the pink moon, after a species of early blooming wildflower in North America. May gives us the flower moon, and this is because of the abundant flower blooms that occur as soon as spring really starts to get going. And June saw the strawberry moon. This was the moon when the strawberries were ripe and everybody went out and hunted and harvested their strawberries. And in July we had the back moon, and this is the time when male deer begin to regrow their antlers. August saw the sturgeon moon. Now sturgeon, for those that don't know, is a big fish, and apparently around August is when they appeared in large numbers in North America. September sees the corn moon or harvest moon, and this is the time when the crops are harvested and gathered at the end of the summer season. October is the hunter's moon, but also it's named the harvest moon too, and that is because every 3 years the September moon doesn't appear in September. Remember I said the lunar and solar cycles do not sync up. Sometimes the September moon actually appears in October, and when it does, that's when it's called the harvest moon. November gives us the beaver moon, and this is the time when beavers become active, building dams and preparing for the winter. And December sees the cold moon, sometimes called the long night's moon, and this marks the coming of winter. Now I have another set of moon names. These are the names from the old English lunar calendar, and it's really interesting to look at these and compare the two cultures and the way they've named the moons to be appropriate for, well, basically what's going on in their world. So the first moon in January, they call it the moon after Yule. Very practical. And February again sees the snow moon. March sees the Lenten moon, and this is because it was around the time of Lent, and also again it was the last full moon of winter. April sees the egg moon, and this is a time when the birds are nesting and they begin to start laying their eggs. May is called the milk moon, and this is really interesting. This is apparently when the livestock would produce the richest milk of the year, and this was due to the abundance of new grass shoots and weeds and herbs. June again sees the flower moon. July, the hay moon, and this was the time when they should really be starting to think about finishing up the cutting and baling and storing of hay for the coming winter. August saw the grain moon, and this is the time when the grain and corn were gathered. September saw the fruit moon, and this is the time when the fruit would be at its ripest and was ready for the picking. October saw again the harvest moon, and November the hunter's moon, and December we're back to that great old practicality again. It's the moon before Yule.